Imagine you spent the last 3 years and tens of millions of dollars building the perfect, highly guarded software application.
Right.
It is your company's absolute crown jewel. I mean, you've hired the best engineers, implemented top-tier cryptographic security, and designed a user interface that's just a masterpiece.
A real work of art.
Exactly. Now, what if I told you an artificial intelligence could just, look at your screen, bypass all of that back-end security entirely, and completely clone your life's work by next Friday?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. What is your proprietary software actually worth in that world?
It's an utterly terrifying proposition for anyone sitting in a traditional tech boardroom right now.
I bet.
We are no longer dealing with, hypothetical futurism here. This is the exact unyielding economic paradox we're navigating today.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm Satoshi.
And I'm Satoshi.
Today, we're unpacking a massive paradigm-shifting stack of research detailing a literal rupture in software development happening right now in early 2026.
It really is a rupture.
It is. Our mission is to understand why the traditional black box proprietary code model is entirely dead.
Gone.
We're going to examine why open source is no longer just a utopian playground for hackers compiling their own kernels at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
It's now a strict strategic inevitability for any business aiming to survive.
Absolutely.
And most importantly, we're going to figure out how you, listening right now, can navigate a landscape where the fundamental physics of digital value have completely inverted.
To set the baseline here, we're essentially witnessing the software equivalent of a science fiction replicator.
Oh, I like this. Like Star Trek.
Exactly like that. Think of those classic sci-fi shows where a character wants a cup of Earl Grey tea.
Right. Tea, Earl Grey, hot.
Yes, and instead of boiling water and, harvesting leaves, they just press a button. The subatomic particles materialize into the final product instantly.
Which begs the question, why spend a decade building a starship from scratch in an orbital space dock when you can just ask the main computer to materialize a fully functional warp drive in your living room?
Mechanically speaking, that is exactly what is happening to application code right now.
That's insane.
And this transition from artificial scarcity to absolute abundance fundamentally breaks the tech industry's 40-year-old business model.
Because the whole model relied on hiding things, right?
Precisely. The entire software economy was built on the premise that hiding your code was how you generated revenue. You compiled the code so no one could read it.
Right.
You locked it behind a server, and you charged for access. But in a world of zero-cost replication, trying to hide your code is a guaranteed path to total irrelevance.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly grasp the mechanics of this shift, we need to look at the evaporation of the code moat and, the definitive death of the GPT wrapper.
The infamous GPT wrapper.
Yeah. For the last couple of years, the industry was just flooded with startups building applications that were under the hood, nothing but a polished user interface.
Just sitting right on top of a foundational AI model from OpenAI or Anthropic.
Exactly. For a brief, fleeting moment, those wrappers actually appeared to be viable, scalable businesses.
Well, they looked good on paper. A team would engineer a clever system prompt, design a slick graphical user interface in React, and charge users a $20 monthly subscription.
Easy money.
But the fatal flaw was that the core cognitive engine, the raw intelligence actually executing the tasks, did not belong to them. It was a leased commodity.
And the data from our research in early 2026 gives us this staggering timeline of how quickly this application layer is collapsing. They call it trivial cloning.
Trivial cloning, yes.
Let's look at the launch of OpenAI's Canvas. This was introduced as a highly touted proprietary workspace for writing and coding, a massive value add to lock users into their ecosystem.
It was supposed to be their big moat.
Right. But within roughly 3 weeks, it was completely cloned as Open Canvas by LangChain.
3 weeks.
3 weeks. And I want to dig into the how here, because LangChain didn't just copy the visual look.
No, they replicated the entire functional orchestration.
Right.
For those who might not be, deep in the weeds of AI architecture, LangChain is an open source framework. It's designed to simplify the creation of applications using large language models.
So what did they actually do with Open Canvas?
What LangChain did was look at the utility of the original proprietary tool. Then they built an open architecture that could do the exact same thing, but they added multi-model support.
Oh, meaning you aren't locked into one provider. You can plug in whatever model you want.
Precisely. They took a proprietary walled garden, cloned its functionality, and turned it into an open plaza.
That's a great way to put it.
The speed of that replication, 21 days from launch to open source obsolescence, is the critical metric for anyone paying attention to software evaluation today.
We see the exact same architectural vulnerability with Search GPT.
Oh, absolutely.
The user interface for AI-driven search, that incredibly smooth experience of asking a question and getting a curated, cited answer, it was thought to be a massive competitive advantage.
Everyone thought it was unassailable.
But it turned out to be a complete commodity. Open source alternatives like Perplexica and OpenPlexity cloned it in under a month.
Under a month.
And again, let's look at the mechanics here. They didn't need to steal proprietary search algorithms. They just used open source retrieval augmented generation, or RAG.
RAG is the great leveler here.
How so?
Well, instead of needing a multi-billion-dollar indexing infrastructure like Google, these open source clones simply take the user's query and run a fast traditional web search.
Just to grab the top relevant documents, right?
Exactly. Then they feed those documents into a foundational model to synthesize the final answer. The magic of the proprietary interface was completely hollowed out by accessible, modular, open-source components.
So the interface itself offers zero defense.
None whatsoever.
Now, I could hear a skeptic arguing out there. They're saying, sure, text generation and search are easy to clone, but what about highly complex, real-time, multimodal systems?
That's the usual counter-argument.
Right. They'll say, look at advanced voice. That proprietary magic of real-time, emotive, interruptible AI voice interaction. That requires incredible engineering.
It does require incredible engineering.
But the research shows that was replicated almost instantaneously by local models like Llama Omni and Whisper.
The local inference aspect is what truly destroys the cloud computing moat in that scenario.
Break that down for us.
Sure. Whisper handles the real-time transcription. Then models like Llama Omni process the auditory nuance and generate the response. And because consumer hardware has become so incredibly powerful, you can run this entirely locally on your own machine.
Meaning you bypass the cloud latency entirely.
Exactly. You don't even need their servers.
Yeah.
But to your earlier point about how these systems are cloned so quickly, we have to talk about visioned code.
Yes. This is the part that genuinely bends my mind.
It's fascinating.
Because the AI isn't just taking a screenshot of a competitor's app and, drawing a static picture of it.
Not at all. Foundational models are now highly capable multimodal systems.
Right.
When you feed a complex dashboard or a user interface into one of these models, it doesn't just see pixels, it parses the visual hierarchy. It maps the structural logic.
So if it sees a navigation bar with a drop-down menu.
And a data table below it, exactly. The model cross-references that visual pattern against millions of lines of front-end code it has ingested from GitHub.
Yeah.
It infers the underlying state machines. It deduces what the database schema must look like to populate that table. It reverse engineers the invisible architecture of the product simply by observing the surface.
Okay, let me try an analogy here. It is the equivalent of looking at a beautifully intricate sandcastle right at the tide line.
I like where this is going.
You spend months sculpting the towers, carving the tiny spiral staircases. That is your UI design and your complex workflow logic.
A lot of hard work.
Exactly. Now, the foundational AI models are the ocean. They provide the water and the sand.
Right.
But the moment you finish your masterpiece, the open source tide washes in, analyzes the exact structural integrity of your castle, and seamlessly duplicates it perfectly across the entire length of the beach.
That is an incredibly apt mechanical metaphor. The ocean doesn't care how hard you worked on the spiral staircase, it just replicates the pattern.
It's terrifying if you're the one building the castle.
And this reality demands a fundamental shift in the rational behavior of a software company. Historically, when a company faced competition, the rational response was to build higher walls.
You obfuscated your code, you patented your workflows.
You threatened legal action, and you locked down your ecosystem.
You deployed a private security force to guard your specific sandcastle.
Exactly. But if your user interface and workflow logic can be algorithmically reverse engineered just by being observed, then any feature you build on top of a foundational model is inherently temporary.
So hiding the code is no longer just a wasted effort. It actively harms you.
The rational response in a landscape of zero-cost replication isn't to build higher walls. It is to open source the code immediately to gain ecosystem integration, developer mindshare, and community momentum.
Which means if you are an entrepreneur designing a startup today, or an investor deciding where to allocate capital, you have to ask yourself a very sobering question.
What's that?
Are you betting on the sandcastle, or are you betting on the ocean? Because betting on a proprietary application layer right now is statistically a very fast way to incinerate capital.
And that realization is already tearing through the public market.
Oh, big time.
We cannot examine the trivial cloning of individual features without tracking the cascading financial fallout hitting the massive, monolithic software empires that were originally built on those exact types of features.
You're talking about the Spacepocalypse?
The Spacepocalypse, yes.
It sounds like the title of a terrible B movie. But the financial data from the research we're looking at is brutal.
It's a bloodbath.
The market correction triggered by this shift wiped out nearly $1 trillion in market value from legacy tech giants by early 2026. $1 trillion just evaporated from the ledgers.
To understand the mechanics of a trillion-dollar evaporation, we have to dissect the foundation of the software as a service, or SaaS, business model.
Let's do it.
For 2 decades, enterprise giants like Salesforce, Atlassian, and Workday built their valuations on 3 very specific moats. The first was hiding the code, which we have established is now technically obsolete.
Right, the ocean washed that away.
The second moat was creating highly complex user interfaces that forced what the industry calls muscle memory lock-in.
Oh, muscle memory lock-in is the bane of every corporate employee's existence.
It really is.
It's the reality that Salesforce or Jira are so uniquely complicated that once your entire sales or engineering team learns exactly which 25 nested menus to click to log a deal,
The switching costs become astronomically high.
exactly. Nobody wants to halt productivity for 6 months to retrain 10,000 employees on a totally new system.
The complexity was a feature, not a bug. It guaranteed renewals. But the third moat, and the one most deeply tied to their stock price, was per-seat licensing.
Charging by the human.
Yes. The fundamental mathematical assumption of the traditional SaaS model was that headcount was a direct linear proxy for corporate productivity.
Meaning more people equals more software licenses.
Exactly. If a logistics company wanted to grow its sales pipeline, it hired more salespeople, which meant it was forced to buy more Salesforce licenses.
Right.
If a bank wanted to execute more data analysis, it hired more junior analysts and bought more analytics software seats for them. The software vendor's revenue scaled in lockstep with the client's human headcount.
But the research out of early 2026 proves that AI has aggressively severed that linear relationship. We've crossed into an agent-first world, and the math has violently changed.
It's a total paradigm shift.
Consider this metric. One single human operator, utilizing an orchestrated swarm of AI agents, can now execute the work of 5 traditional analysts.
That is a catastrophic equation for a per-seat pricing model.
It's a colossal revenue leak. I mean, think about the implications. If I run the demand forecasting department for a global supply chain, and I can suddenly accomplish the output of a 50-person department with just 10 highly skilled operators managing AI agents,
You're dropping a lot of licenses.
I am immediately canceling 40 enterprise software licenses. I'm not reducing my output at all. In fact, my output is likely faster and more accurate. But the SaaS vendor just lost 80% of their recurring revenue from my account in a single afternoon.
We are seeing this panic manifest at the highest levels of the industry. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella has explicitly characterized the traditional SaaS model as being at a point of potential collapse.
Wow.
When the architect of one of the most successful enterprise software transitions in history flags the core model as structurally unsound, the paradigm has definitively shifted.
I want to push back here, though. Let's play devil's advocate for a second.
Please do.
Because there are enterprise architects listening right now who are shaking their heads. They'll concede that an AI can clone a neat little voice app or a text editor. But what about massive enterprise systems?
The really heavy stuff.
Yeah, things like global trade promotion management or deeply integrated ERP systems. Those platforms require years of highly specialized engineering.
They do.
They require armies of overpriced consultants mapping out thousands of obscure edge cases and compliance regulations. That kind of deep bureaucratic enterprise logic cannot possibly be cloned by an AI observing a screen. Right.
That was the exact assumption that allowed $1 trillion in market cap to be wiped out.
Ouch.
You are describing the physics of the old reality. We have to look at the mechanism of what is now called the weekend clone.
The weekend clone. A phrase that brings absolute joy to startups and sheer terror to legacy boardrooms.
It perfectly encapsulates the disruption. Now, the weekend clone doesn't mean an AI magically writes an entire enterprise system in a vacuum in 48 hours.
Okay, so how does it work?
It relies on a team of generalist developers, not hyper-specialized enterprise software architects, just competent generalist coders. They use AI agents to ingest all the public documentation, API structures, and user manuals of the legacy system.
So they feed the AI the manuals.
Yes. The agents process this massive volume of data, map the edge cases, and generate the foundational boilerplate code and database schemas at a velocity humans simply cannot physically match.
So the AI is essentially reading the instruction manual of the legacy software and building a functional replica of its internal logic engine.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Work that previously required 3 years of engineering scrums and millions of dollars in payroll is being recreated for pennies on the dollar.
And because these new entrants are building from scratch with AI orchestration, they carry zero legacy technical debt.
Oh, that's huge.
They don't have thousands of middle managers or massive campus leases in Silicon Valley to pay for. This leads to the massive pricing disruption we are seeing across the board. The contrast between HoloSign and DocuSign is the textbook example of this mechanism in action.
Let's break down that math. DocuSign is the quintessential legacy SaaS company. They charge somewhere in the neighborhood of $45 a month per seat.
Per human.
Exactly. If you're an enterprise with 1,000 employees who need the authority to route and sign contracts, you're bleeding capital every month just for digital signatures.
It adds up fast.
Then, because the code moat has evaporated, a new entrant, like HoloSign, uses AI to build a functionally equivalent digital signature protocol over a weekend.
A literal weekend.
And what do they charge? A flat $19 a month per organization. Not per seat, per entire organization.
They can offer that devastating price point because their cost to build, host, and maintain the software is virtually zero compared to the legacy giant.
They are completely undercutting the incumbent's pricing power.
Which forces us to ask a tough question. What actually happens to these underlying SaaS applications when AI agents become the primary interface for work?
Right, if your AI agent can just negotiate directly with a lightweight, open-source protocol on the back end to execute a contract, why would you ever pay for a complex graphical interface and a per-seat license?
You wouldn't. The legacy applications risk being hollowed out into invisible, commoditized infrastructure, the interface dies, and the protocol takes over.
Speaking of shifting paradigms and escaping old pricing models, before we jump into the deep end, if you are getting value out of this show, we request you to check us out on fountain.fm.
It's a really unique setup.
It's a value-for-value player where you actually get paid for listening without advertisements blocking your experience. It's a great platform.
Absolutely.
And of course, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube Music for free, or wherever you get your daily audio boost. As for videos, we still need to hit our goal of 1,000 subs on YouTube to start using the Mosaic AI video editor.
We are so close to that goal.
Mosaic is truly a game changer for small creatives like us. It really is. We can feed it a YouTube link and it creates beautiful AI, cinematic captions, infographics, and a whole lot more we're still discovering in our capability tests.
The capabilities of those generative media tools are advancing just as fast as the code generation we're discussing.
They really are. Now let's get back to the architectural shift. We have established that closed-source SaaS is bleeding out. The code moat is a myth.
That much is clear.
Therefore, open source is the undeniable victor. But when you dig into the research, there's a massive warning flag regarding how we actually define open.
This is a very sensitive topic.
We have to distinguish between true protocols and what is categorized as corporate trickery.
This distinction is paramount because developers and the broader open source community possess a remarkably sensitive immune system.
An immune system.
Yes. Humanity has this uncanny ability to smell the intent behind a technology project. We intuitively recognize the difference between a genuine public good and a strategic corporate trap.
I love that concept of smelling the intent. So mechanically speaking, what does a true protocol smell like?
A true protocol smells like selfless toil. It is characterized by slow, methodical consensus. Projects like Vim, Git, and Nix were not incubated in a boardroom to hit quarterly revenue targets.
Right, nobody was checking the stock price when they built Git.
Exactly. They were born from developers solving their own painful problems and sharing the solution with the community. Because of that pure intent, they eventually hardened into the immutable, trusted standards of the developer's craft.
Git is the absolute perfect example to dissect here. Git isn't just a collection of code that manages version control. It's a massive, interconnected global network effect.
It's everywhere.
It is sustained by over 100,000 active contributors. If a massive tech conglomerate, let's say Microsoft or Amazon, wanted to, they could easily assign an AI to clone Git's entire code base tomorrow.
But cloning the code is useless.
Why?
You cannot clone the 100,000 developers who maintain it, stress test it, improve it, and most importantly, trust it. You cannot fork trust.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it. You cannot fork trust. And the research specifically points to Nix and the NixOS ecosystem, describing it as a pure build protocol.
Nix is fascinating.
I want to pause here because it really is. For anyone who has ever dealt with dependency hell, the classic, well, the code works on my machine problem.
Every developer knows that pain.
Nix solves this by treating package management like a purely functional programming language.
Yeah.
It uses cryptographic hashes to ensure that if a build works on one machine, it will work exactly the same way on any machine, down to the byte.
And that level of deterministic reliability didn't happen overnight.
No.
Nix required decades of quiet, persistent, often thankless commitment by a core community. It slowly evolved from a niche package manager into the foundational bedrock for massive, modern development platforms like Replit.
Decades of work.
Yes, that kind of deep structural foundation only forms when the community has absolute certainty that the project won't suddenly be closed off, paywalled, or weaponized against them by a corporate board.
Which brings us to the stark contrast of the big tech giants today. You look at Meta releasing the Llama models or Google maintaining Android.
Right.
They wave the banner of open source very loudly. They say, look at us, we are giving away billions of dollars of R&D for free.
This is exactly what the research defines as the corporate proxy or trickery. These are not true protocols. They are highly calculated strategic weapons.
Strategic weapons disguised as gifts.
Exactly. We can explain this behavior using an established economic principle known as the law of conservation of attractive profits.
Also known in strategy circles as commoditize your complement. Let's break down the mechanics of how this works.
If you look at Meta, their primary business model has nothing to do with selling artificial intelligence software.
No, it's ads.
Their business is capturing human attention and selling highly targeted advertising space. However, a pure-play AI company like OpenAI, which exclusively generates revenue by selling access to its foundational models, represents a massive potential threat to the ecosystem Meta relies on.
Because they could become a gatekeeper.
Exactly. If OpenAI becomes the single toll booth for intelligence, they can squeeze Meta's margins. So how does Meta neutralize the threat?
Oh.
They spend billions of dollars training a massive, highly capable AI model like Llama, and then they release the weights to the public for free.
So they intentionally commoditize the exact thing their competitor relies on for survival. They make the foundational model free, which utterly destroys the competitor's pricing power.
It is brilliant, and it is entirely ruthless.
So what does this all mean? Let's use an analogy here. Compare true open source to building a public library where everyone shares knowledge.
Right.
But the corporate trickery is like a billionaire buying the empty lot right next to a rival's coffee shop, and they just set up a tent and start giving away world-class barista-made coffee for free indefinitely.
I love the coffee shop analogy.
The billionaire doesn't care about making a profit on coffee. They are subsidizing the coffee with their mall revenue solely to starve the independent shop out of business.
It is market manipulation disguised as philanthropy. And there is a critical technical distinction that proves Meta and Google's projects are not true protocols. Projects like Llama are technically open weight, not truly open source.
Expand on that difference because it is crucial.
Open weight means Meta allows you to download the finished, compiled neural network, the billions of tuned parameters that make the AI work. You can run it on your machine.
Okay.
But they fiercely guard the training data, the data curation pipelines, and the methodologies used to create those weights. You are given the fully baked cake, but you are strictly denied access to the recipe, the ingredients, and the kitchen.
So you can drink the free coffee, but you have no idea how the beans were roasted, and you cannot roast them yourself.
Precisely. And because of that deliberate lack of transparency, the developer community will never fully trust an open weight model the way they trust the Linux kernel or Git.
They know it's a trap.
They know they are entirely dependent on the corporate benefactor's goodwill for next update. It is a leash, not a foundation.
This brings us to a conceptual leap that I found incredibly profound in the research. We have established that true open source builds these massive, incredibly loyal communities.
Right.
But the ultimate unavoidable question for any business trying to survive is, how does giving away your code actually generate wealth?
It's the multi-million-dollar question.
If you aren't charging for seat licenses and you aren't hiding your intellectual property, how do you keep the lights on? The research explains this by illustrating how value actually physically moves in this new architecture through a mechanism it calls the winding force.
The winding force is a beautiful economic concept. It relies on viewing technology as having a foundational base and a derivative superstructure.
Base and superstructure, oh yeah.
The core, undeniable economic truth of the AI era, and this is a reality that traditional MBAs violently struggle to accept, is that freely sharing your code is the most rapid path to wealth and structural dominance.
Because the value flows upward.
Actually, it's the reverse. Value inherently flows from the derivative superstructure down to the foundational layer.
Ah, I see.
The ultimate, most pristine example of this is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is, at its core, simply an idea and a set of cryptographic rules that have been forked, copied, and modified thousands of times.
Right. Anyone listening to this could copy the Bitcoin repository right now and launch Deep Dive Coin tomorrow.
But doing so does not threaten Bitcoin.
It actually reinforces Bitcoin's dominance. Let's look at the mechanical relationship between Bitcoin and Ethereum.
This is a perfect example.
Ethereum is fundamentally a conceptual fork of Bitcoin. Architecturally, it's very different. Ethereum is a Turing-complete state machine that allows for complex smart contracts, while Bitcoin is a purposefully rigid, secure, distributed ledger.
Right.
But Ethereum's foundational value is entirely anchored in the existence and success of Bitcoin.
And that detail from the early days of crypto is just staggering.
It really is. When Vitalik Buterin and the Ethereum founding team ran their initial coin offering to fund the development of their new network, they didn't raise US dollars.
No, they did.
They raised Bitcoin. They collected over 31,000 BTC to fund Ethereum.
That is the winding force in action. Ethereum did not replace Bitcoin. It became a highly productive superstructure built on top of the initial cryptographic concept.
And by existing, it added value back.
Exactly. By requiring developers to understand blockchain mechanics, it added massive validation, mindshare, and ultimate value back to the foundational layer.
We see this exact same physical reality in traditional open source software with Linux. Linux is the absolute bedrock of the modern internet.
Everything runs on Linux.
Every cloud server, every Android phone, most of the financial system. And there are thousands of different Linux distributions out there. Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, Arch.
All derivative distributions.
And every single one of those derivative distributions acts as a winding force.
Yeah.
Every time Ubuntu patches a core security flaw or Red Hat improves network routing, that development energy is pulled back to the core Linux kernel.
The winding force operates almost exactly like gravitational mass.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Every time another developer copies your work, every time they fork your repository on GitHub, they incrementally increase your gravitational pull within the ecosystem.
You become heavier.
Your project becomes heavier, more central, more unavoidable. In the archaic proprietary mindset, someone copying your code was a lethal threat. In the open source foundational mindset, every single fork is a structural reinforcement of your dominance.
And if a corporation tries to fight that gravity, the financial penalties are catastrophic. This introduces the concept of the hidden maintenance tax.
A painful tax for many companies.
I want you to imagine a massive Fortune 500 corporation. They decide they want the stability of Linux for their servers, but their security team insists on keeping their specific modifications secret.
So they create a private, closed-source fork of the Linux code.
It is a depressingly common and almost universally fatal corporate decision.
It is a complete disaster. Because let's look at the mechanics of what happens next. The main public Linux kernel is a living organism. It is being updated, patched, and optimized thousands of times a day by a global hive mind of developers. If you have a private secret version frozen in time, every time the public version updates, your secret version drifts further and further out of sync.
You are fighting the entire momentum of the global developer community.
I picture it like trying to translate a massive technical manual into a secret language, but the original author is writing 50 new pages a day.
Suddenly, your most brilliant engineers aren't building new features for your company. They are spending 80% of their time just trying to resolve merge conflicts and manually port new security patches into your old hidden code.
It's a massive drain on resources.
The research explicitly calculates that maintaining a private fork of an active project like Linux can cost an organization upwards of $3.5 million annually in wasted engineering hours.
$3.5 million just to hide code.
It is literally mathematically cheaper to just give your incredibly valuable proprietary upgrades back to the open source community than it is to try and hoard them in the dark.
The hidden maintenance tax is the silent, inevitable killer of proprietary enterprise software. When you attempt to fight the winding force of open source, you don't build a moat. You just drown your engineering team in technical debt.
Exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, sharing information to build a foundational community is exactly what we try to do here. We can't be more thankful that you all are as fascinated by these deep dives as we are. The key to this vote of confidence is the research we share on our website.
Exactly. No login needed, no cookies, no trackers, and absolutely no advertisements. So please, if you want to dig deeper into the numbers, check the link in the descriptions, because today is a big one.
Huge.
So we've arrived at a fascinating intersection. The winding force proves that the foundational protocol layer is where the real power and value reside.
Right.
Simultaneously, we know that multimodal AI can instantly observe and perfectly clone the visual application layer. So what on earth happens to the actual software we use every day?
The screens we stare at.
Yeah. This brings us to the final and arguably most profound segment of our deep dive. The research suggests that for any proprietary software to survive this transition, it has to evolve. Or, more accurately, it has to completely disappear.
We are talking about the mass transition toward agent-first architectures.
Agent-first architectures.
The logic is impenetrable. If your visual user interface is your greatest vulnerability because it allows an AI to observe and reverse engineer your underlying logic,
then the only mathematically sound defense is to eliminate the visual interface entirely.
Exactly. The industry is calling this headless AI.
Headless AI. It evokes a very spooky sci-fi image, but structurally it makes total sense. We're talking about the complete eradication of the UI.
The proprietary moats of the next decade will not be constructed from visual pixels, intuitive drop-down menus, or beautifully crafted data dashboards.
No more spiral staircases on the sandcastle.
None. They will exist entirely in the invisible back-end logic. The software of the near future will operate purely through AI agents communicating asynchronously with other AI agents.
This means we have to radically redefine how we think about design. We need to talk about AX, the agent experience.
Goodbye, UX. Hello, AX.
For 40 years, the tech industry has been utterly obsessed with UX, user experience. Human designers meticulously A/B testing the exact shade of blue for a checkout button.
Or analyzing eye-tracking data to optimize screen layouts for human dopamine loops.
Right. But if the new front door for software isn't a screen at all, UX is dead. The new front door is an API, an application programming interface, and structured data schemas designed exclusively for a machine to read.
This raises an important question for front-end developers and product designers. How do you design an experience for an entity that doesn't have eyes?
An entity that doesn't experience frustration.
Doesn't care about the color blue, and can process a million lines of JSON data in a fraction of a second.
The mechanics of AX are entirely different. An AI agent doesn't click a button. When it needs information, it hits an API endpoint.
It receives a massive JSON payload, just raw, structured text outlining all the available variables.
Then it evaluates those variables deterministically against the user's parameters, and it fires back a cryptographic payload to execute the action. There's no DOM, no CSS, no visual rendering whatsoever.
The latency requirements, the authentication protocols, the strict necessity for deterministic outputs, these become the new design language.
I want to paint a vivid picture of this for you, listening right now. Imagine your daily life just a few years from now.
Okay, picture it.
You never open a web browser to book a flight. You never log into a convoluted corporate portal to run a quarterly financial report. You don't have a folder on your phone with 50 different apps, each with 50 different, slightly annoying interfaces you have to learn.
The interface just becomes conversational language.
Right. You just speak to your personal AI in natural language. You say, book me the cheapest flight to Chicago for next Friday that gets me there before noon and make sure I have an aisle seat.
That is your entire interaction.
That's it. Then your personal AI agent goes out into the dark, invisible, headless internet. It doesn't load Expedia.com.
It connects directly via API to Delta's AI agent and United's AI agent.
They communicate in raw data schemas at light speed. They negotiate the price, verify seat availability, and initiate a cryptographic handshake to execute the payment using a tokenized API key.
The entire transaction happens in the dark in milliseconds.
The user interface simply does not exist for you.
It is a profound, permanent shift in the paradigm of human-computer interaction.
It really is.
And in that invisible, headless world where code generation is instantaneous and user interfaces are absolute commodities, what is the ultimate defense for a business?
The research points to one singular surviving structure, what it calls the final moat.
The final moat. In a reality where any workflow logic can be cloned over a weekend and any interface can be replicated by a vision model, the only assets that cannot be synthetically generated are community, established trust, and the deep network effects of the protocol era.
The application layer is a commodity.
The bedrock protocols are the future foundation of digital life. Those companies who remain stubbornly entrenched in the old proprietary GUI-based paradigm.
The executives still trying to charge $45 a seat for a pretty dashboard in a walled garden.
They are fighting a lost war. They are deploying conventional weapons against the hyperdimensional cloning capabilities of the very artificial intelligence they helped train.
The only viable path forward is to aggressively contribute to the shared foundation. You have to let the winding force pull you into the gravitational center of the ecosystem.
You must internalize that every time someone forks your project, it is not a threat to your business model. It is a structural reinforcement of your relevance.
It requires a complete, ego-destroying inversion of traditional business logic.
You win the market by giving the code away. You achieve total dominance by becoming the invisible foundation that every other agent relies upon to function.
Which brings us to a final, slightly provocative thought to leave you with today.
All right.
If the user interface completely vanishes into this headless, API-driven architecture, and AI agents are the only entities actually talking to the software, does human design even matter anymore?
Oh, wow.
Will the entire concept of a front-end developer or UX researcher just evaporate into the history books alongside switchboard operators? Or will the most valuable, highly compensated skill of the future simply be the ability to engineer and verify trust in a completely trustless, automated void?
It's a staggering transition to conceptualize.
It really makes you wonder, how do you brand a company that a human eye never actually looks at?
To synthesize this massive architectural shift, we are accelerating away from a world defined by artificial scarcity.
In code, punitive per seat licenses, locked-in muscle memory.
Exactly, and we are hurtling toward a world of absolute open-source abundance. The apocalypse we have dissected today isn't really an ending. It is a violent, necessary market correction.
The unquestionable winners of the next decade will be those who embrace the winding force of open-source protocols.
They will build resilient, high-trust communities rather than trying to desperately defend a fragile sandcastle of proprietary code against an endless rising ocean of artificial intelligence.
That is the perfect encapsulation of the stakes. We would love to hear your thoughts as you process this shift. Please subscribe to The Deep Dive wherever you listen.
We really value the community feedback.
We invite you to comment and actively join our mission of collaborative intelligence. Specifically, if you have deep technical expertise in open-source protocol architecture, AI agent integration, or the economics of SaaS pricing, we want to hear your perspective in the comments.
Your ground-level insights help drive the direction of our next exploration.
I'm Satosha.
And I'm Satoshi.